So Jessica, thanks for being here. Can maybe give us a little bit of your background and who you are, which organization you're with, and maybe how you got there.
Sure, thank you, and thank you for having me. My name is Jessica Diniz. I'm the president and CEO of Breakthrough T1D Canada. I've been with, formerly JDRF, I've been with the organization for 9 years, but I've always been in the nonprofit sector, probably closer to about 20, 25 years. Love this sector. I feel incredible about the progress that the nonprofit sector is making throughout Canada and around the world. So Breakthrough T1D is the global leader in funding type 1 diabetes research and advocacy. And what that means is we look around the world, we fund the best type 1 diabetes research that's happening. So that's usually at universities and hospitals. And I think the secret sauce is we actually ensure that they're working together. And that's a really key missing piece. We make sure they're all talking. We bring them together. We bring experts from Australia, the US and Canada, and we get them to share what they're learning, because at the end of the day, I don't care which hospital cures type 1 diabetes. We want everyone, it will take everyone to move the work forward. So research and then advocacy. We work to improve policy and access to devices and insulin for people living with type 1 diabetes.
So I want to go back to something you said. You said formerly JDRF. Can you explain for those that don't know about JDRF, what does the formerly mean and what that transition has meant for you?
Thank you. So JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, was formed 50 years ago, and it was formed by parents who were frustrated. They felt that diabetes was, type 1 and type 2 was compared. There was lack of awareness, and there was lack of focus for people with type 1. And these were parents with young kids who wanted to see change. And why I say that, I think it's such an incredible story of people stepping up and leaning in. And that movement started in the US, and 4 years later, some Canadians heard about it, brought it here, and then expanded to Australia, the UK, Israel, Netherlands, and then we became JDRF Canada. So we've existed for 50 years, but over the last 2 years, really have understood that the world of type 1 diabetes is evolving, and so must we. And what I mean by that is the medical term is type 1 diabetes. Back when we were founded, it was called juvenile diabetes. And so why this is so important is 85% of people living with type 1 are over 19. It's not a children's disease. And although often children are diagnosed, we're feeding a misnomer that this is a children's disease. So it was important to recognize that we weren't helpful in feeding something and change and listen. So we did a huge fact-finding and listening tour and understanding of how we could better represent the community and make sure our doors are wide open, that we serve the entire type 1 diabetes community.
So how did, when you make a decision to change a name midstream after 50 years, what was the pushback like? Was there any pushback even after or during the consultation process?
That's a great question. It was a 2-year process, and I think done exceptionally well. And I think the key to that is we hired a global brand agency and did a very data-driven approach and engaged all the different countries together and said, we're going to look at data. We're going to make decisions on data. And everyone kind of came together and agreed on this. And, we have families who founded this organization who are still involved, who, of course, there was question of whether we should be switching our name or not, but brought them along on this journey of looking at data and understanding how people perceive our organization and do they understand what we stand for. So I think the understanding we needed to change was the first barrier, and then getting everyone on board of what that change looked like.
So what came first? I guess maybe that's not the right question. So understanding that you needed to change to better align the cause with the medical diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. Was that something that was brewing for several years? Like how did that play out? And what was that moment where the decision was made, yeah, we really need to explore this, and then go on a 2-year journey to explore it with the key constituents?
That's a good question. I think we've known it for several years. I think the organization globally together decided now's the time. Now is the time to make that decision. And let's lean on data. Data will help us, and you can't argue with data. The other thing is being an acronym was very tough. It meant every time you had to explain J2RF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So the acronym, the fact that we represent everyone living with type 1. And the other thing that our data showed us is adults living with type 1 didn't see themselves in us, in our brand. They felt perhaps we didn't work for them. And that's a real problem with 85% of your population doesn't think you work for them. So we knew we needed to change. But the other thing we said is, let's put our mission right up front. People don't understand what we do. The data told us that. Yeah. Let's lead with what we do and embed it right in the center of our brand. And that's why we came up with Breakthrough T1D.
That's what you're trying to achieve. When you did the 2-year consultative process, was it more about testing the idea of change, or was it more about letting people in the community know that change was coming?
It was more testing to understand and learn. And then we did a long process to let people know change is coming. And I think that was important. And we weren't sure how the brand was how people would react to the new brand. And I think data was the key. That was a learning for me. When you lean into data, it's hard to argue. I think people may say they don't like the word breakthrough or not, but they understood why we were changing and support the change.
Well, I guess that's a question that I find interesting for donors who maybe that have been supporting the formerly named organization, and then all of a sudden it's called something new, but they have an emotional connection to the old brand. And how do you navigate them through that connection to the new brand? You mentioned the process of letting them know. But what did you do that might have been unique or special to recognize that maybe they've been supporting this for 50 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. We did a listening tour and really identified some of those donors who've been in supporters, have been involved with us for many years, and engaged with them. And this wasn't an email. This was conversations with our supporters and our donors to listen, to let them know this is coming. And we actually, because we're a global organization, the US changed their brand first. They changed in June. So this gave us an opportunity to learn, to listen and learn and see what they've gone through. And then the UK happened in October, and then we changed in November. So the global aspect of our organization has been helpful in learning from each other so we can make sure that we adapt.
And I guess now the challenge is letting those casual supporters know that, hey, this is what Breakthrough is. Maybe they were familiar, maybe they weren't, but putting the right face and right brand out in the community from this point forward.
Exactly. And to that point, for the next year, our logo will be Breakthrough T1D, formerly J2RF. We think that's important, that we can make sure this transition happens effectively. So we'll stay with that and then transition to Breakthrough T1D.
When it comes to changing the brand, what advice would you have for smaller organizations that are maybe trying to figure out if their brand is relevant? They haven't been around for 50 years, but how do you figure out if you're relevant and if you're connecting to the right people?
That's a great question. And my advice to any nonprofit is to measure it, to do a brand survey. And you can get an external organization to do that. And I would say that's important because they can be third party and they can help you create a benchmark. And then you can use that every year to understand, are you moving the needle? So I think there's a couple of things you want to measure: your brand awareness within your donor pool and supporters, but also outside. Does the average Canadians know who you are and what you stand for? We ask other questions like, does it give you confidence? Do you understand what they do? And then benchmark them against other organizations. And this was a really important measurement for us to see, are we moving the needle, and what do people think about us? The other, and I'm just such a fan of data, and I think it can really help you in decision making. When we tested our new brand, we learned that in different countries, type 1 diabetes is referred differently. So, and there may be a country where T1D is an acronym used, or type 1 diabetes. Like finding the right word, acronym that would work globally was very tricky. And then the other thing with Canada is we have a strong Francophone community. Finding a brand that we could translate into French, it actually should be French first brand name, and lead with that was incredibly important. We surveyed Francophone donors, and they said it needs to be French first. It can't be a translated name.
One of the things that I love what you said is your reliance on data. Where are you getting your data, and how are you using that data to inform not just the decision-making process that you have around brand, but around the other aspects of operating your organization driving towards the breakthrough that you hope to achieve.
Yeah, we actually use data quite a bit. And I think in all my time working in the nonprofit industry, I'd say that was the biggest thing I've learned, listening. I think that's what we've done well, listening, asking questions, and using that for your decision making. So not only do we use it to measure our brand, but we survey the type 1 diabetes community often to understand what are their biggest needs and gaps, because those things change too on an annual basis, and make sure we're allocating resources where the type 1 diabetes community wants to see us fighting for them, whether it's policy, whether it's research or mental health. We also measure our donor satisfaction and how they feel we're doing, and are we engaging with them. One of the best things I can tell you that we did in 2020, early in the COVID lockdown era, we did a listening tour. And looking back, that was probably the most beneficial thing that I've done, is we picked a handful of donors, and we spent time with each of them, and we asked them hard questions and got really good feedback. And some was hard to hear, but we used that to form our strategy of how to change. We listened.
Did you get any resistance to going on a donor engagement tour from maybe board directors or other people who said, you're not going to learn anything, we're supposed to be in the driver's seat?
No, not at all. And I would, give my advice to others would say, pick the toughest donors, ask your toughest supporters, and ask them what you could be doing better. And don't be afraid, be humble, and don't be afraid to learn from them. And that you can use that to form your strategy for the future. What we heard from donors was they want to know exactly where their gift is going. They want to understand the impact. They want to be stewarded and regularly, not just once a year. And speak to me regularly and get to know me. So the insights actually shifted our whole business model for the future.
I'm going to suggest that the fact that you reached out and engaged them in this conversation strengthens the relationship and the bond that you have with that donor anyway, who, yes, you thank them for their support, but they thank you for caring about what they care about. So I think it's remarkable from an engagement standpoint. In that process, did you learn anything? And you mentioned going back over a couple of years. Did you learn anything that maybe changed the way you approached the fundraising aspect of what you're doing in Canada in particular, since that's the area that you cover?
Yeah, we actually learned a lot. So, what I would say is early COVID days, our board in this, I would say March, said, how do we come out of COVID better than when we went in? And they challenged our management team to change faster than we would, because we felt we had an opportunity. So we created a small committee of our board and worked weekly to form a different strategy of how we could be better. We were always going to make that change, but we felt we could shift quicker. And a couple of these changes we were a very grassroots event-based organization. In events, there's a high cost of events. So again, we asked ourselves, can we do this better and differently? Can we use volunteers more and be less staff-led? The other thing is we had 7 offices in Canada. We asked our employees, is this something that they want to continue? We've been working remotely for a couple months. So, and these are donor dollars that we're using for rent. So we asked ourselves those tough questions and said, no, let's move remotely. We'll learn and be humble enough to say we'll have to learn how to engage our employees in a remote work environment. But again, the dollars that we can save and put towards our mission is significant. So all that change that we went through and formed a new strategy to be more efficient, we are now 40% more profitable from pre-COVID to now. So I feel we did a great job of listening and making change happen.
So that improvement, a lot of it is going to come from the efficiency on the employee side, but I'm going to tackle both of these separately. But you haven't stopped doing events-based. If you haven't stopped the event space, you're continuing to do that. Have you noticed that efficiency has carried over into how you're handling the large events and the community events that you're doing?
Yes. Yep. So what we did is, prior to COVID, we used to manage, let's say 60 walks across the country, 40 rides and galas. And we asked ourselves, is this the most efficient way to raise funds? Is this the best way we can make an impact for Canadians living with type 1? So I think events are important. They bring awareness. They bring profile. They engage the community. We just asked ourselves, can we be doing it differently? So we went out to our community and said, would you run our walks? And how about we be the trainers and we give you manuals and tools? And our volunteers are incredible. They said, yes, we'll take it on. So we went from a very staff-led model for walks to we are training and helping and supporting. So it's quite a different change internally. And then the results can continue in terms of still having walks.
So when you redirect that staff time, so the events are still taking place. They're now volunteer-led with some staff oversight for sure. But how have you repurposed that staff into other areas to kind of advance the mission?
So we made a decision to really grow, what would be called major gifts or individual leadership giving, and make a huge transformation in that area. We were 65% revenue coming from events, and we said, how do we invert that and flip it on its head? And I'll tell you, in 2 years we switched, and now we're already seeing 65% of our revenue coming from individual giving, foundations, corporate philanthropy. And that was, it takes a different approach to grow a major gifts program within a nonprofit. Thoughtfulness, really carving out specific projects that you can raise funds for, and building skill and capacity within your team who has that background on how to do it.
So this ties into the employee side. So you've freed up some employee time that used to be spent running events. You've redirected them to major gifts. At the same time, you've reduced your office space commitment. How did you train and train or skill these new people to move the conversation towards these major gift conversations and building these deeper relationships with donors?
It took some time. We had to bring in staff who had that experience and that skill. The other thing we did is we launched a $100 million campaign at the same time. This was our largest major gift campaign that we've ever run. So that gave us the case, the model, the mechanism to start raising funds. And I'm happy to say we've raised $85 million against our 100 in 4 years, so record breaking. But we needed a platform to start major gift fundraising, and a campaign can do that. It can really help rally the community, rally volunteers, and focus your efforts to drive impact. And the $100 million, it was a goal, $100 million net. We wanted to put $100 million and inject it into research in Canada.
I know other people are listening and saying $100 million, that's a mind-boggling number. I'm a small charity. I can't possibly think of how we could put the big hairy audacious goal on the table like that. What would you say to somebody who maybe has never even contemplated that kind of a number before?
I'd say be bold. What I heard from donors when we did our listening tour, I heard they want us to be bold. They said, I think they want us to dream big, have a plan, and make sure it's a very thoughtful plan, but I felt they wanted us to go hard at curing type 1 diabetes. And they want to see us taking those big swings if it's going to advance our mission. And really having a plan for how your mission is going to be advanced. So our $100 million campaign is not just a big number. We mapped out very specific pillars. We have 6 pillars under that, and what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to launch a center of excellence within UBC focused on cure research. That's a $10 million project. We wanted to advance mental health and type 1 diabetes. We heard that from our listening tour in the community. So we wanted to start a mental health strategy. So we did that, and we wanted to advance venture philanthropy within North America. So that was part of it. So we crafted 6 pillars. We also work with the research arm of the federal government, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, and we created a big partnership with them. $15 million from us, $15 million from them, a $30 million partnership to advance type 1 diabetes. The other big theme that I would say, and I encourage other nonprofits, partnership is embedded in our fabric. We see, are there other like-minded groups that we can bring to the table to make our mission go forward? To cure type 1, it won't be just donors and volunteers. We will need the government, we'll need pharma or biotech, we need other partners all working together to advance that mission. So we went out and built partnerships with Brain Canada, the Canadian Institute of Health Research, Diabetes Canada, the Stem Cell Network, many groups to say, we're trying to do the same thing. Can we go faster together? And I think that's an important aspect that nonprofits can do to make your mission happen quicker.
How important is it from your perspective that when you're approaching a potential major donor, that you actually have a long-term vision, a long-term plan that you can communicate so that they can connect with that and you can achieve some measure of value alignment.
Thank you for asking that, and I think that's critical. I talked about hairy, audacious goals, but it really starts with your plan of how you want to advance your mission. And I would say start there and be hard on yourself. What do we want to achieve? And make it measurable and be very clear and timely, and map that out first. That should come before any of your fundraising. What do you want to achieve? What are the short-term and long-term goals? Then comes your fundraising. So mission first, fundraising second. And that the mission impact should form your strategy for advancing either major gifts or foundation giving. And that's where we started. We said, what do we want? How can we help Canadians living with type 1? And we really looked ourselves in the mirror and said, what's the best thing we can do? And what do people want us to do? And we spent months just on that. And then we formed our strategy around fundraising. So mission first and fundraising second.
Would you say that that applies equally to the corporate partnerships that you've established? Is about clearly communicating and articulating your mission and then finding alignment within their corporate culture?
Yeah, absolutely. And my suggestion to nonprofits would be never shift your mission to fit into a donor or corporate partner or foundation's their mandate. It's easy to do that. Stick to what you want to achieve, and then you look out there and say where is their alignment? Where are their organizations wanting to achieve the same thing? Whether it's inequity or mental health, figure out what you want to do first, and then look to see what other partners want to do the same thing.
I think it's remarkable that the lesson here is that even if you are established, you have to constantly evaluate and survey your supporters, survey your network, survey your community to make sure that you remain relevant. I hope that we get a cure for this in short order, and that you get the $15 million you need will come, and we won't need breakthrough T1D anymore because it's a problem that's been solved. But I think the lessons that you've imparted here are very valuable to nonprofits and charitable organizations alike.
Thank you. And I hope that we won't be, we actually often say, we hope we go out of business. And I don't think there are many nonprofits that will say that. We hope to cure type 1 diabetes and then close our doors. And I will say we are closer than ever. In the 9 years I've worked for Breakthrough T1D, we can see a pathway. We see stem cells being the pathway. We know we can turn stem cells into insulin-producing cells. We know we can put them in the body. What we're now trying to figure out is how do we protect them from the immune system attack, and where to put them. So we are at a really exciting place for type 1 diabetes research, and that's because of supporters, donors, founders who've come and brought us to this point.
So if you know somebody who's affected with type 1 diabetes, what can your organization do for that individual? Maybe people aren't aware.
Thank you for asking. So we exist for people living with type 1. That is our mission. Our mission is to accelerate research towards cures, but make lives better along the process. So I just want to explain a little bit how we do that. We fund research, but we also change and influence policy. One thing that people don't know is type 1 diabetes is a very expensive disease to manage, depending on your insurance coverage or which province you live in. The average person can be out of pocket $18,000 a year. This is something that people don't know, and what we do is we meet with provincial government as well as federally to advocate to improve policy. The challenge in Canada is that we are governed provincially by healthcare. So every province has different restrictions and rules. So this is something we constantly work to improve access to life-saving devices. It's shocking to me that insulin is required to stay alive living with type 1, and yet it's not completely covered for everyone, or continuous glucose monitors, devices that will improve your outcomes. They are not covered in every province. So that's something we fight hard for and advocate. My message, if you are personally affected by type 1 or you have a family or friend, get involved, reach out to us, and let's talk about how you can be part of advancing our mission, and we'd love to work with you.
Simplest way to do that is by going to the website, which is
breakthrought1d.ca.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.